Hello, good morning, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. We are very excited to have you here. I'm Dr. Spiny, and I'm with the Assurance Department here at Deloitte. Before we get started, let's take note of a few housekeeping rules. First, we'd like to mention that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube page. Secondly, currently all participants have been muted. During the question and answer session, you can raise your hands and you'll be unmuted to speak. You can as well drop your comments and questions in the Q&A chat box on your screen as the webinar is ongoing. A survey link will be put in the chat box for you to provide us with your feedback. Get to the end of the webinar. That summarizes the housekeeping rules. And now we would like to take a message from our country managing partner, who is a huge sustainability advocate. Over to you, Dan.
Good morning, morning, Dorcas, and thank you. Can you confirm if you can hear me?
Dan, I can hear you.
Okay, good. And good morning, participants, and a warm welcome. And thank you for making the time to join what promises to be an exciting conversation about sustainability and ESG. It is an undeniable fact that sustainability is on its way to becoming an important and significant consideration in determining business value and viability. And this is what I call the 2 V's. We have, in the light of recent happenings and in acknowledgement of Deloitte's position as a leading professional service firm, assembled experts to introduce to us this topic and the issues and to discuss the trends in reporting requirements. You would have also seen that we have assembled the Deloitte team and the materials that are available to all participants on this webinar today. We hope you find the session useful, and if you are yet to begin your sustainability journey, this will hopefully serve as a trigger for you and your business. On behalf of the partners and staff of Deloitte, let me say thank you all once again for joining this webinar today. Let me hand over back to you, Dorcas, to continue with the next session whilst I join in as a participant. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan. Next, we would like to introduce our panelists for today. First, we have Kwabena Impusitu, a partner at the Assurance Department in Ghana, at Deloitte Ghana, sorry. Kwabena is an assurance partner at Deloitte Ghana. He's also the head of Deloitte Academy and a deputy leader for our financial services industry. He has more than 15 years post-qualification experience in all aspects of auditing, accountancy, and consultancy services. He has acquired immense experience in international financial reporting standards, IFRS, championing in West Africa. Kwabena has worked on various assignments for clients in the banking, insurance, and oil and gas sectors. He's also a key member of the Deloitte Africa Accounting and IFRS Specialist Group. Kwabena is a fellow of the Association of Chartered Accountants, Certified Chartered Accountants, ACCA. Next, we have Naache Kone. She's the senior of the Assurance ESG Deloitte South Africa, Assurance Ghana, Deloitte Ghana. Naa is a qualified lawyer with a 12 years combined experience in environmental, social and markets, legal research, strategy, and consulting. Naa's forte is providing strategic advice to companies and helping them embed sustainability, that's ESG, into their core business strategies. She is skilled at drafting ESG policies and guidelines, as well as designing and delivering trainings for staff, management, and board members of the firm's clients. Additionally, she guides companies to develop tools, systems, and processes for the effective implementation, monitoring, and reporting for their sustainability ESG strategies. Next, we have Joyiti Vala. Joyiti is a partner within Assurance Services, specializing in ESG assurance and reporting. She's a qualified chartered accountant with 20 years of experience in the accounting and auditing profession. Her past 11 years have been focused on providing sustainability assurance and advisory services to a cross-sector of clients and industry. Her objective is to enhance credibility to clients' business and related processes through applying her knowledge skills to ensure that quality is maintained and balanced with best practice insight. Next, we have Dennis Mate Esquire. Dennis is a member of the Ghana Bar and Managing Associate of Tyler Crabb, Barristers and Solicitors. He has experience in providing legal advisory services for the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources, Forestry Commission, civil society organizations and international development agencies such as FAO, UNDP, and the EUD. He has consulted on various projects to audit and benchmark Ghana's laws, policies, and institutional framework against treaties and international best practices for reform. All right, now I would like to hand over to the assurance partner, Kwabena C2, to welcome us officially to this webinar. Thank you so much. Over to you, Kwabena.
All right, thank you very much, Dorcas. Do you hear me?
Kwabena, I can hear you.
Okay, great. All right, thank you so much. So I'll go straight to the point. Good morning, everyone, and I think welcome to this very important webinar. This webinar has been themed Global Sustainability and ESG Trend. The theme of this event is very important because ESG and sustainability has come to stay. So there is no way you can do business in the world today without talking about sustainability. So ESG and sustainability has really come to stay. Now, there's key questions that investors are asking companies nowadays. One of the key questions is that, are you sustainability friendly? So as a company, as you are operating within wherever you are operating from, are you sustainability friendly? These are some of the questions that the investors are asking. Now, if you are able to answer that question as yes, then you are worth investing in. So that is the key indicators that, or the key determinant factors that the investors are now using to decide whether to invest in your company. So if you are ESG and sustainability friendly, then you are worth investing in. And if you are not, then you are likely not to have the required resources you require from the investors. When it comes to ESG, it has evolved over time. So you are looking at in the 80s, they used to call it environmental health and safety for employees. Now we are talking about E, S, and G. So we are dealing with the environment, we are dealing with the social aspect, and we are also dealing with the governance aspect. So these three things are what we are looking at when it comes to the ESG. So it has evolved over time. Now, when you come home to Ghana, all right, and you are dealing with ESG, you can see that there have been several developments within the environment. And what are some of these key developments? You have the Bank of Ghana issuing its sustainability or sustainable banking principles that was issued way back. Then you have the Ghana Stock Exchange this year also took the initiative to issue its ESG disclosure guidelines. All right, so I think that happened in November. And then the Ghana Stock Exchange again also launched its sustainability bonds. So that has also been done. And then when you are preparing your account using the International Financial Reporting Standard, which is issued by the IFB is also working on a mega project, a major project, which is dealing with sustainability disclosures. So that is also happening at the reporting side of things. So very soon, all the companies that are using the International Financial Reporting Standard, you are going to apply the standard on sustainability disclosures. So that is also coming, and it will hit us very soon. So ESG has come to stay. When you look at the budget that was read just this year for the 2023 Ghana budget, you realize that there were three important statements that the government said when it comes to sustainability and ESG. And I'll read these three statements, these three very important statements to you to bring home the fact that sustainability is here to stay. And we cannot run away from this sustainability agenda. In the budget, in the 2023 budget, the government made three striking statements when it comes to sustainability. Number one, it said Ghana will build a climate-proof resilience into the economy to prepare the country to handle future shocks and protect existing infrastructure, property, lives, and livelihoods. So that is one of the key statements the government made. Number two key statement that the government made in the 2023 budget is that government will continue to engage the private sector to invest more in private capital through PPPs for climate resilient infrastructure projects, as well as the voluntary and compliance bond markets. And the third statement is that government is going to use the COP27, which just happened in Egypt, to open talks on debt for nature swaps and boost private sector investment as key opportunities to speed the transition to low carbon economies. So these are important statements that the government of Ghana has made in order to support the ESG and sustainability agenda. So you look at it, we are surrounded with ESG sustainability, and it is very important that we are able to comprehend what is all this ESG and sustainability thing about. How can a company comply with the ESG requirements that has already been issued in Ghana? As I said, the Bank of Ghana has issued a guideline with respect to sustainability reporting. The Ghana Stock Exchange in November this year also issued its sustainability guideline. So how can companies, comply with all these ESG requirements? And it has now become mandatory. So we are going to look at various aspects of this requirement and then see how we can, comply with these ESG requirements. And I think we have fantastic panelists here who will do justice to the topic, which is global sustainability and ESG trend. So without much ado, I will hand over to Dr. again, who will then introduce the moderator for this webinar. Then we will go into the details of the theme for this event, and then we will pick it up from there. So thank you very much, and enjoy this session, and ask all your questions, because we have experts who can respond to all your questions. Thank you, and have a great day. Thanks. Over to you, Dr. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have one last panelist. I'd like to introduce him in the person of Kwadna Otu-Okam, who is an environmental specialist with the World Bank. Kwadna holds both MPhil and PhD degrees in botany from the University of Ghana with specialization in plant ecology and conservation. He's also a certified ISO 14001 lead implementer. Prior to joining the World Bank, Kodina was the environmental management specialist on the bank-funded Ghana Development Finance Project, where he supported the establishment and achieved the implementation of an environmental and social management system for the recently launched development pipeline. So, to kickstart this webinar, I would like to hand over to our host, Na, who is a sustainability lawyer at the Assurance Department here at the World. So over to you.
Thank you, Dorcas. Thank you, Dorcas, and welcome once again to everyone who's been able to join us for this session. Sustainability is an all-encompassing descriptor of an ideal. I say ideal because there's so many components that go into it, and we'll find out what makes up sustainability, what makes up ESG in the course of our discussions today. We'll spend the next the next 1.5 hours, because we've done 30 minutes already. We'll spend the next 1.5 hours trying to deconstruct the word and the concept that has gained prominence in the last decade. We'll explore the different summarized overview of the evolution of the concept. We'll then build upon that by having the panelists share their knowledge and experience of the 3 pillars of sustainability or ESG. And these 3 pillars are environment, social, governance, and why private sector should care. And the first part of the conversation should provide context for the second phase of the webinar, where we'll look at the primary players and then key drivers of sustainability and or ESG in the private sector. And then we'll end the conversation with the topic of whether or not Ghana needs a national sustainability or ESG framework, given the recent development in the global and local reporting space. And then when we're done with that, we'll take some questions from participants. In the meantime, as Dorcas said when she read out the housekeeping rules to us, if you have any questions in the course of the conversation, you can put it in the chat box and the team will work on answering some of the questions. And we have also received some questions from participants when they registered. And it's quite interesting that some of the questions went beyond the scope of today's conversation. Of course, we are happy to provide answers, but those answers will come in the form of a Q&A that will circulate to the email addresses that when you supplied when you registered. And then also the questions that we are unable to answer today, we will also put it together. We'll also put it together in a Q&A and then share with you following today's session. I'm sure we have a mix of persons on the call today. Those who are familiar with sustainability, with different or varying levels of familiarity, and then we have those who are new to the subject altogether. So by way of background or introduction, Ghana is at the very early stage of its sustainability journey. If we compare to the more matured jurisdictions like the EU and the US, would say that they are quite advanced, and indeed they have been pioneers of the concept of sustainability and ESG. So we should have it at the back of our minds that we currently in Ghana, we don't have a perfect system or a near perfect system, and that is why we have put this together to trigger the conversation, to get people talking about it more, and to make it more mainstream and part of our everyday conversation. And the Bank of Ghana took the lead in this space by the first institution in Ghana to institutionalize sustainability and ESG when they released the Sustainable Banking Principles in 2019. That is barely 3 years ago. And as you've already heard, we've recently had the Ghana Stock Exchange launch its ESG disclosure guidance manual. So the conversation is slowly creeping into our businesses. So we want to start that conversation. We want to see how all of these things fit together. and then see how the way forward for us as individuals and for us as businesses. So thank you once again for joining, and we are going to just shoot straight into the agenda for today. So we're going to start with Kwabena. Kwabena, are you there? Our environmental specialist from the World Bank. Hello, Kwabena, can you hear me?
Yes, good morning. Hello to you all. You
Good
were
morning.
breaking at the point, so I was wondering whether it was only at my end.
Okay. I haven't received complaints, so perhaps it's from your end.
Hello, Na.
Yes.
Hi.
Thank you.
Yes,
Well,
yes.
I want to invite Joy T and Dennis so that we can all see our faces and the participants can see you, all of us, those who are talking to them today. So yes, I think we are set to get things rolling, and we'll start with you. Can you quickly and very briefly give us a brief history of ESG sustainability, and then what goes into it?
Great. So at the point, I was wondering if Kwabena had seen my note because he's done a good job giving us an idea of the history, and I think I'll probably just do something in a few seconds. So he mentioned that in the 80s, there was this great talk about EHS, environment, health, and safety, and where this EHS basically was based on the development of environmental and then employee regulations. And then we moved into the 90s where sustainability became the big thing. In the 90s, you remember the 1992 discussions that went on, and the Brundtland Commission and all those things that I believe many people on this call are very much aware of, where they wanted to focus on reducing environmental impact beyond legal requirements. So there had been we don't want to fall foul of the law. Then we moved to a point where now we actually noticed that beyond just the compliance with legal requirements, there were other things that we could be doing that could contribute to a sustainable business environment. And then we moved to the 2000s and to the 2010s, where now CSR becomes the ish thing across the group. So where they are talking about the corporate philanthropy and employee volunteerism being used to align social issues. And then finally we came to the 2020s, where ESG has 2020 and beyond, where now has become the main thing, the main technology that is that is being used all over. So I have had to go through this small evolutionary process because I want our listeners and our audience this morning, participants, to understand that when we mention ESG, it is nothing new. There are components that are already known. There are components that most of our companies are already practicing. Now, ESG becomes that terminology that seeks to provide, a more holistic concept, and also related to competitive advantage and risks and reward management. So it's add on to all those things that we have experienced in the past few decades. And so that will probably be the little I would want to add to what Kwabena said from the very beginning. So anytime ESG comes, is placed on the table, what we're looking at is that ESG provides long-term reduction in recurring expenditure. Now, this is something that I'm sure some companies can identify with. So if you have anything, any mechanism, any tool, any policy, any process, any procedure that is supposed to result in a reduction in recurring expenditure, that whole system may contribute to an ESG. It is part of the ESG we want to discuss today we are looking at ESG as management of human capital. And in most of our companies, they are very qualified HR personnel who are doing this and are applying a lot of standards within that space. There are people on this panel who are going to probably deal with this into much more detail even as we continue. So this is an aspect that I'm sure is also known to people. Now we are saying that ESG is also about, organizational reputation. And I want to believe that every company represented on this webinar cares about its reputation. So what are those things that we are doing already that we can, look at again, explore other opportunities or add-on opportunities in order to be able to do much more than we are doing now in order to improve upon our organizational reputation. So ESG, is that holistic terminology that looks at all of these. And I believe that even as we continue with the discussions, there will be opportunities to provide some practical experiences, some practical examples to help us appreciate this. So the E looks at the environment, the S looks at the social, the G looks at governance. And just to provide a few examples under each, so under the environment, you are analyzing how a company's activities is impacting on the environment and then how they are managing the environmental risk. So you're looking at both direct operations across the supply chain. You are looking at areas of resource scarcity and management. You're looking at natural resources preservation. You're looking at gas emissions and pollutions. Under the social, usually we want to examine the strengths and weaknesses of how a company manages its relationship with its employees, with suppliers, with customers, and the communities where it operates, including working conditions, operations in conflict regions, health and safety, employee relations and diversity. And finally, on the governance bit, you're looking at the company's leadership, issues of executive pay, audit, internal controls, shareholder rights, and of course, for the institution that I work with, gender equity, equal pay, bribery and corruption, and board diversity are very much of high concern to them. Thank you, Nan. Over to you.
Thank you, Kwabena. And that introduces us into the core of today's discussions. So he mentioned the different pillars as we are aware about. That's the environment, the social, and the governance. So we are going to pick a few of the most popular indicators and that environment, because there's quite a tall list of indicators under all the three different pillars that Kwabena has mentioned. So with the environment, we want to start with climate change because it's one of the biggest topics. And one of the major reasons why companies have even been pulled into the conversation because of we are speaking in general terms, their huge carbon footprint and the consequences and implications for the environment and society as a whole. So to kickstart the topic of climate change, I would want to bring Dennis in at this point. Dennis is going to speak to us. He's going to explain very briefly what climate change is for the benefit of the participants who are not aware. And then he will talk a bit on the impact on Ghana, and then as well what we are doing, private businesses are doing, and what government is also doing to tackle the impact of climate change. All of these in a very brief and general terms, because we don't want to laser focus on only one aspect to the detriment of all the other equally important topics under the E, the S, and the G. So we'll spend a few minutes listening to Dennis explain to us what climate change is and how how all of this affects us as Ghanaians or those of us in Ghana. And I do recognize that some people have joined beyond Ghana, but it's today's conversation is from a Ghanaian perspective. So I'm sure you all pardon us as we focus unusually on Ghana and what's going on here. Over to you, Dennis.
Hi, it's nice to join everyone. So as Nan said, I'm going to give a broad overview of climate change. In the simplest terms, climate change is results because through our industrial activities and activities of man, we emit greenhouse gases, which tend to form an envelope around the Earth and prevents the escape of heat that forms after the sun's radiation hitting the surface from going back into space. So it's like we have this envelope and the temperature or our climate begins to become warmer. And this has a lot of implications. So I will just quickly give some gloom facts. That's what's happening in Ghana currently because of climate change. In Ghana, our annual temperatures have risen by 1 degree Celsius since 1960 at an average rate of 0.21 degrees Celsius per decade. The number of hot days and hot nights have also increased by 13 and 20% respectively. And this is very significant, particularly because we are a tropical climate, right? And if we are having these high incidents, it tells us that globally our temperatures are going very high. And this is predicted to increase to about 1 to 3 degrees Celsius by 2060. Also, overall rainfall in Ghana has also reduced by 2.4% over the decade. Rainfall has become more erratic and it's become more variable. And we are also expected to have more extreme events. I mean, between 1968 and 2021, we've had 32 major natural disasters, which have been reported. And averagely every year, we have about 45,000 Ghanaians suffering from flood. The sea levels have also increased, and this is causing us to have erosion along the coast. And this is very significant for Ghana because we have a lot of our major cities and infrastructure across our coastline. And it's expected that the sea level will rise further. What are the implications of all these fiscal changes that I have talked about? It has an impact on our food security because agriculture and livestock underpins our economy and our food security. It's about 33% of our GDP and gives about 50% of people their livelihoods. So when we have warmer temperatures and a greater incidence of droughts, it's likely to cause agricultural losses, which will result in food insecurity and people will lose their livelihoods. Again, when there's a greater incidence of high temperatures, it's going to affect production of food. It's going to also affect our water resources. Because of the erratic rainfall pattern, we are going to have a difference in the quantity and quality of water. It also has an impact on our health. It's estimated that more than half of the diseases in Ghana are linked to our climate variability and exposure. And when the climate changes, we are going to have higher infection rates of diseases and malaria and meningitis. Again, climate change has very implications for our national security. I mean, we are in a region which is increasingly becoming unstable because of conflicts in the Sahel. When climate change happens, it's going to make the region less suitable for human life as temperature rises. There's going to be fewer resources and there's going to be more conflict in fighting for these resources. So to sum all this up, it means climate change will be the way it impacts our economy and us as individuals or companies will largely depend on how the firm's vulnerability and capacity to adapt. Now asked that I talk briefly on what is being done locally to deal with climate change. Internationally, Ghana has done everything that we ought to do. We have signed on to the UNFCCC, we have signed on to the Paris Agreement. We have actually updated our nationally determined contribution, and we intend to implement about 47 actions. And the interesting thing I would want to point out is, of these actions, we expect international finance to play a key part in this. About $22 billion is needed for all these climate change mitigation and adaptation actions. And of this 22.6 billion, only 6.3 has been earmarked to be generated locally. And because we'll be needing a lot of international finance coming in, it is important that government actually takes putting together a policy on ESG framework together to make Ghana an attractive site for foreign development finance initiative. Yes, so now I would hand over to you.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you for sharing your insights on climate change and its impact and action in Ghana. Kwabena, besides climate change, what other issues should we concern ourselves with when it comes to the environment under ESG?
Before then, I quickly want to add on to what Dennis shared with us. I mean, local interventions that are being undertaken in the climate, change mitigation and adaptation space. So from the World Bank angle, I can actually at least confirm that we are supporting government on the Ghana land restoration and small scale mining project. We are doing what you call the forest investment project, where basically we're providing government and the implementing agencies with resources to rehabilitate mined out land. We also have projects where we are trying to, the contributions of abandoned landfill sites or landfill operations to climate change. So it's something that also concerns the bank a lot. In fact, it concerns government a lot. All these projects are government projects that the bank is supporting. So I think it's fair that I say these are government projects. So a number of them have been identified. They've gone through the necessary processes, and the idea is to rehabilitate all these abandoned landfill sites. There is the Ghana Emissions Reduction Project, which has been implemented by the Forestry Commission together with the Cocoa Board. And the idea also is to, already we are doing some things in areas they call the HIs, the hot intervention, biodiversity hot intervention spots. And the idea is to enable community involvement and leadership in some of these climate change activities that we are undertaking as a country. So I'll probably just end it there, and then later on I probably will show where we could find some of this information and update ourselves on some of these things that are happening nationally. So I understand there are a number of financial institutions who are also on this call, right? And I would want to go from that angle in terms of the environmental issues. So I'm sure there are companies on this call who are wondering, I'm only a company, I probably am not a manufacturing company, I'm a financial company. All I do is to provide funding or financing to some other people. So all this talk about pollution, all this talk about environmental management, how important or how germane are they to my business? So the idea is that we all want to be able to help from our own, in our own small way. So there's research that suggests that, built up environment or some of these buildings that we occupy actually contribute a lot to city pollution in terms of the emissions from some of these buildings. And so the idea is that now there is a shift towards green buildings. The IFC has developed a certification program that is relatively cheaper than most of the internationally recognized, certification processes called EDGE, which means Excellence in Design for Greater Efficiency. And they are pushing this idea a lot in developing countries where we can afford some of these things. So I can assure companies that may not be directly engaged in pollution that what you could be doing as a small company in your own building is looking at the green credentials of the buildings. So some of these buildings may already be up, and so you may need to do some kind of retrofitting and stuff like that. But for people who are here to build, there's opportunity for you to consider green initiatives in your building design and to be able to come up with structures that are eco-friendly. We are looking at issues of emissions. So I'm sure there are companies here who are into oil and gas. I am told it's supposed to be one of the greatest, one of the sectors that contributes the greatest to emissions. So what technologies are we looking at? What technologies are we considering in ensuring that we are efficient in the use of our resources, the resources that we require to do the work that we do? So there are technologies at the design phase, there are mitigation measures that we need to incorporate into our operations beyond the design phase. There are issues of, in terms of the resource efficiency, there are issues of even raw material sourcing, raw material management, and the extent to which we are able to better manage some of these resources that are quite important to our operations would also determine the extent to which we contribute to a climate-friendly environment. So I guess I just want to end here, and then we can add on later. Yeah, thank you. Now.
Thank you, Kwabena. So beyond resource efficiency and emissions management, what other indicators can we say are important under environment? Because usually I know that resource efficiency is top on the list when it comes to, like you said, corporate corporate bodies or organizations that are not into manufacturing or are not oil and gas companies. We look a lot about it. We look a lot at their resource efficiency. We look a lot at their energy management. We look a lot at their emissions. But are there other things that you come up when it comes to, for instance, mining companies or oil and gas companies or companies that or agricultural businesses? When it comes to issues of clearing large tracts of land, what are we looking at? And when it comes to agricultural inputs, are there any considerations under that? Are there other things that we should look at under issues relating to the environment?
Exactly. Now, so I intentionally focused on those things that are probably readily comprehensible, but you are right. So there are companies in the extractive sector, there are companies in the manufacturing industry who tend to contribute a lot to the degradation of our forest. And then so biodiversity conservation and then protection of living natural resources becomes a very important area of concern. And in fact, we have seen that over the years, our appetite, which is good for development, has actually led to a lot of degradation of our forest reserves. We are losing some very important biodiversity elements. So I'm looking at flora, I'm looking at fauna. In fact, in the process, we have endangered the lives of some of these very important resources that also provide what you call ecosystem services to societies, to people, to communities that live within the enclaves of some of these areas. You're looking at your watershed systems, the kinds of the kinds of contributions that we get from watershed management. You're looking at even wetlands. In fact, the challenge now is that we find people trying to even build on wetlands, basically reclaiming a wetland and putting concrete and mortar in place of that. And these things continue because sometimes you realize that people with money ready to invest sometimes do not even appreciate what it is that they are doing to the environment, because your wetland is supposed to be providing a lot of critical ecosystem services for communities adjoining such areas. Now we've seen all over the kinds of negative impact that we're generating on some of these areas. And so we need to understand some of these things, the impacts of our decisions or the consequences of our decisions on some of these ecosystem services that are being lost as a result of habitat being destroyed, being eliminated, and you have critical ecosystem services being lost as a result. Then also, you are under the environment, you are looking at pollution of river bodies. We have seen a number of activities going on, ending up in polluting river bodies, and sometimes there are communities downstream these river bodies that are dependent on them. And so you find that after some time, people are beginning to report higher cases of water-related or waterborne diseases. And sometimes you do a little investigation and you realize that this is so related, or this is as a result of somebody's inaction. So that's I mean, those are a few that I would want to share for now. Yeah, thank you, Na.
Thank you, Kwabena. Joyty, can you share with us briefly, maybe in a sentence or two, how it's been like engaging businesses when it comes to issues relating to the E and the ESG? Are they usually very willing to comply and take more sustainably friendly decisions, or do they push back and provide resistance?
Thank you, Noah, for that question, and I hope you can all hear me. Yeah, I think it depends on, I think, where and which industry companies are in. And I think, those within the mining sector, more with, I suppose, an environmental and a social issues, have been more adaptable, have taken on this, understand the responsibility and they need to actually make an impact within the environment and society in a good way, and make it sure that the society continues to exist for the sustainable future. I think many others within manufacturing, financial services, are similar to what Kwabena said, is actually questioning, how does this really affect me, and probably need a bit more guidance in terms of understanding where those would be. And they are very approachable in terms of that. I think others are, as I said, are really in the infancy and need to really understand where their strategy, what their purpose is, and any of those things really needed to be aligned. And I think through conversations that I've seen with clients, once one has actually explained what really E, S, and G really mean and how this could actually have impacted a business, really the conversation opens up, and understanding that it's not a standalone matter. This is matters that affect your day-to-day business and shouldn't be considered in terms of that. Once that is understood, it's really a beautiful conversation we have with our clients. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. It's nice to hear that businesses out there are quite responsive. It provides inspiration for us, and we know that there's a lot of positivity out there, and people are quite welcoming when they know the benefits of implementation and compliance. Now we want to leave the arena of the environment and move into social. And I think it's perhaps the biggest umbrella under the E, the S, and the G, because it cuts across so many sectors, and it looks more at the different stakeholders in the conversation. So that is what we want to. I think it's right that we start with labor rights and issues relating to labor when it comes to the umbrella of social impact. So when we talk about labor rights and the ESG, what are we looking at, or what are some of the things we are looking at?
Okay, so when we look at labor rights and ESG, So the first point I would want to make is often for labor rights, it's expressed in the local legislation and regulations. And even though this is a factor that is useful for a company to have to manage risk, the laws usually require that companies adhere to them. So the first often is the right of an employee to equal pay for equal work. Employees are entitled to join unions. They have freedom of association and the protection of their right to organize and collective bargaining. There's a protection against forced labor. Also, often there's a regulation on minimum age. There's also a regulation on equal remuneration, and there should be no discrimination at the workplace. When a company respects these rights, it allows the company to operate effectively and efficiently because the workforce is often positive and productive. It also creates an environment that allows the workers to enjoy their rights, and this will reduce the risks and cost of turnover, absenteeism, or strike actions. It also ensures that it helps attract talent because employees would like to work in an environment that ensures their growth and their performance. And the important thing in ensuring all these labor rights is the right of freedom of association, because when that is allowed, often the other labor rights are safeguarded by these associations. This factor of labor rights have actually been expressed in our Labor Act, where employers have been given duties and employees have rights, and all the things I've mentioned have been expressed in our legislation. Yeah.
I guess what we're saying is Ghana as a nation is on course with its labor protection, the protection of the rights of its workers and employees. And I guess that's a good thing for us. So at the end of the session, we get to clap for ourselves. Kwabena, can you please speak a little more to the issue of health and safety in the workplace? Perhaps you can dedicate just about 2 minutes to explore that a little further.
All right, now, so health and safety, interestingly, is actually entrenched in our labor laws, as Dennis mentioned. It is also quite explicit in the Factories, Offices, and Shops Act. And you'll also notice that because Ghana, I mean, like some other developing countries, also take a lot of funding from outside, it is also quite critical to most of our funding partners. And so I guess one of the most popular standard when it comes to this will be the Standard 2, IFC Performance Standard 2, which is labor and working conditions. And critical to that standard is also the issue of health and safety. I think that in Ghana, we have seen some sectors really drive this very, very well. You go to the obviously, I mean, for obvious reasons, you go to the mining sector, oil and gas, you go to the manufacturing industries, you see that health and safety is really trumpeted, quite high. And I would assure you that in most of these industries, when you go in terms of the performance with regards to the requirements, international best practice, you would see that these are things that I particularly have seen a lot of effort go into that. And so these days, you go to most places and you would definitely find an HSC officer whose sole, duty is to ensure that everybody works in a safe environment. So in terms of what is happening in Ghana, I would say that the culture is really being encouraged. It has been entrenched by these mining and manufacturing companies. And I believe that very soon, this is something that will become, quite clear and quite acceptable to all other industries who may not be doing this already.
Thank you, Kwabena. And I think this summarizes the key things that go into labor rights when we talk about labor and the social impact of a business. I know that organizations such as the World Bank and the IFC have other interests, including community rights, especially where the businesses are. Yes, the businesses are located in local communities or amongst indigenous population. Can you throw a bit more light into what the goal of the IFC and the World Bank and in taking these rights seriously, and then how these rights are usually handled and dealt with in ESG?
That's right now. So the World Bank would always say that in all the projects it finances or in all of its activities, it seeks to ensure that its twin goals are realized. One is to reduce extreme forms of poverty, and then two is to boost shared prosperity. And so one of the issues that sometimes consultants have had with the bank or with the IFC is that while in some jurisdictions, if you are an illegal dweller, you are an illegal settler, you are operating illegally, in an area you are not supposed to be operating from, while in most jurisdictions such rights will not be recognized, and you will probably not be entitled to any compensation should the project be happening, within that area. The bank believes that there should be no means by which a project it is financing leads to the impoverishment of another person. And so over the years, what the bank has been doing is to work with government to get them to appreciate why it is important that you use your project as an instrument to better the life of others. You don't use this to impoverish others. So as you said, there's a whole standard on land acquisition. The IFC says land acquisition and inventory resettlement. Recently, the World Bank has adapted that and built upon it. So the World Bank says land acquisition, restrictions on land use and involuntary settlement, because there are times that the activities we undertake sometimes create obstructions to some groups of peoples. People are unable to access their commercial centers because a road is being constructed, earthworks are being done right in front of his shop, and so he cannot access his shop for a period of time. So in the spirit of what the bank believes, for the time that you are going to inconvenience this person and prevent this person from making some sales in order to take care of his family, you would have to compensate the person. So there are higher standards or higher requirements when it comes to the bank in terms of land acquisition, restrictions on land use and involuntary settlement. And of course, you also mentioned the community health and safety. Some projects by their nature generate some hazardous waste that, if they are not properly contained, could lead to hurting communities nearby. So the standard requires for any transaction, for any project, that you have appropriate measures to ensure that people are protected, communities are protected. You are cutting hazardous chemicals from one place to another or to your site. You are going to traverse communities. What kind of thinking has gone into making sure that those materials are secured and that they do not generate any risks to communities that you are you are traversing or you are hauling your goods through? So it usually requires for some deep thinking into what risks could be generated as a result of an activity you're engaged in, and how you intend to manage those risks so that people can assist with business, and together we all can aspire for greatness and all work in a safe manner. Then there is also, you know, that requirement for community consultation, stakeholder engagement, and the idea is that every engagement, every consultation you are having with a community with potentially affected people must satisfy some 4 criteria. The process must be free, it must be prior, it must be informed, and there must be consent. And so a number of standards have been established to guide government, in our case, in ensuring that projects that we support government to undertake all across the country follow some of these best practices, and then, you know, give us the maximum benefit for communities and for the country as a whole.
Okay, thank you, Kwabena. Dennis, I have a question for you on consumer rights protection and product liability. I think it will be of interest to all of us because we are all in one way or the other consumers of a product or of a business. So we want to know what's out there for us in terms of our rights under ESG and sustainability.
All right. So for consumer protection, if I'm speaking to the local situation, we have laws and forms of government regulations which protect the rights of consumers. And it's on the idea that the consumer has an inherent right to basic health and safety. And closely linked to this is product liability, which often is a legal responsibility that has been imposed on the business for manufacturing or selling the liability has been used on a business for the selling of defective goods. And this is from the principle that manufacturers or vendors have knowledge about the products than the consumers do. So therefore, these businesses have to bear the responsibility when things go wrong. As scattered among our laws, from the Public Health Act to the Standard Act to the Public Utilities Regulatory Commissions, we have so many laws that protect the quality and the kind of products we receive from manufacturers. And businesses, in addition to having to comply with these laws to make sure they can operate in their jurisdiction, it's important they are mindful of this factor because product liability cases cases can result in civil lawsuits and lucrative judgments for the plaintiffs. And this would have consequences for their share price if the company has regular lawsuits or product recalls. Businesses also are likely to suffer a decline in their brand reputation if these lawsuits result. And also, it also reduces the competitiveness of their products in the market. Yeah.
Thank you, Dennis. We'll be heading straight towards the governance arm of the discussion. But before we bring Joyty on, we want to launch a survey. We have a question that we want participants to answer. So our technical team will be popping up on your screens. And I think it's a pretty straightforward question. So 30 seconds is a good enough time for participants to respond, and then we can end the poll. So far, just about 50% of participants have answered. We want to give another 30 seconds for the remaining 50%. Okay. We're at 60% and it's not increasing. So I guess it's a good time to end the poll. Okay, so of the 60% that answered, we have 45% indicated that yes, their businesses have a sustainability plan or strategy. 22% said no, and 33% said they were unaware. So I guess that 33% have homework already. Please find out if your business has a sustainability plan or strategy. And as we progress on this conversation, you'd come to find out why it's very important that if they don't have it, they start looking to that space. And that goes for the 22% who answered no as well. Like I said, as the conversation progresses, we will come to see why it's important that all businesses have some sort of sustainability plan or strategy, and with taking actual steps to implement. So yes, we'll move on to the next phase of the conversation. Joyty, when we talk about governance under ESG, can you shed a little light on what we really are looking at or what we ought to look at?
Sure. So I think in terms of governance, we can all agree that we don't have to wrap ESG in a little bucket, but just governance of an organization is so critical, so important, that in order to be successful, that needs to be embedded throughout what the organization does. The board itself is so responsible for stewardship, for oversight, for accountability. They help give that strategic leadership around vision, purpose, mission, give it meaning, ensure that it's delegated to be executed on. They give that oversight across, what needs to work, what doesn't need to work. They get the assurance from management where it needs to be. They give oversight on risk elements. And ultimately, if one reads one's reports that are out there, they're the ones who are accountable and sign off on the information that is actually presented in the public domain as well, which tells the story of not just what the business does, but how the value is created and where it makes an impact in communities and societies as well. So ultimately, the board and management are responsible. They must play a part in terms of strategy, and in terms of understanding people, their health, well-being, mental well-being. Look at what COVID has done to us, right? How the business is impacting society and the communities as well. And to be a responsible business, you need to have good governance in place. Good governance means that the agendas of the board, of senior management, must include the elements and pillars of E, S, and fun enough, G, which is kind of themselves as well. So what does that really entail? It entails ensuring that the people, because boards, senior management, we all people, right? It doesn't mean that one needs to be an expert, I think, in ESG. What one needs to do is really understand and be educated. And I think, through whether it's a training session like this, which gives you guidance around sustainability trends or sustainable development or ESG, it helps you play the right role. It helps those people within these senior executive roles to actually ask the right questions, challenge the information that is being presented to them, how businesses are actually making decisions and on what basis are they doing it. So I think structure becomes important, who we have in it. Is it just finance people, or does it need to be broadened a bit to people who have different types of expertise? And I'm not just talking about like an environmental specialist. There's different types of people, I think, with so many different backgrounds at the moment. What is it that fits the business that is there today? So ensuring competence, understanding the structure, understanding remuneration, and I think we can delve into that a little bit in more detail, but as well is how are boards being incentivized at the moment around this? Are they actually, if they're responsible for oversight around ESG and things like that, how does that actually take place? And are they, I don't want to say remunerated for it, but is it taken into account? Because if things aren't being done, are people being affected by that as well? And where things are being done, to show that the business is making an impact, is that being shown? So I think that's just a couple of points in there. Happy to expand a bit in terms of maybe thinking about committees or roles, if you'd like me to.
We are a little pressed for time, and like we said, this is a general conversation to get things going. So perhaps what we can do is to organize a governance-focused webinar subsequently, where we look into detail what we mean by all that we have just said. So I guess this pivots us nicely into the next phase of the conversation, where we are looking at, so who essentially is pulling the puppet strings, who is making businesses do all of these things. In as much as we would wish it were voluntary, we know that there are some there are some drivers and players that are sort of pushing this businesses to go in this direction. So who are the leader drivers, if I should say? Let's look into how big a role they are playing in all of this, and then yes, share this knowledge and insights and experience with the panelists. Sorry, with the participants.
No problem. So I think, you know, when one goes back and you look at this, I think if you had to have this conversation, I think with many companies, and I talk through the experience that I've had over the last 11 years, it was very much a conversation at a maybe what we would call a sustainability manager level, not at the executive, but the conversation has so changed. We're having this conversation at the board level with the CEOs, with the CFOs, because they understand the role they're playing. Because, as you said, there are so many drivers that they need to be answering to. Stakeholders are asking these questions. COVID has really, I think, over the last 2 years, actually accelerated the need to talk around ESG, respond to the risks and opportunities that are there. We spoke to climate change. I think it was Corbena or Dennis mentioned the 32 natural incidents that have happened across the board, which is calling for the need and the focus on these things. One goes to the WEF risks that have been released, and they look over the scale of the next 10 years. The top 10 risks, majority of them relate to environmental and social risks that are there. No longer do the financial dominate the sector. The top 10 risks, 5 out of the 10 relate to environmental matters. The rest, another 3 relate to social matters. That is driving the need of change within the business, change within people needing to start thinking about things like this. So we spoke about physical changes, so climate change, physical changes in the landscape. I think we raised the question earlier, the access to capital. There's the access and the need, but then also it's about the providing of that capital. And we've seen an interest and an increase in actually the issuance of green bonds, green loans, sustainability-linked information, sustainability-linked loans as well. And it's progress in terms of that, which I think is actually also, and people are asking for it. People within the organization want to have a meaningful purpose. They are wanting to work for organizations that actually have a clear purpose, have a clear impact in a positive manner on society as well. And that's where those drivers are really coming from as well. Public scrutiny. I'm not sure how many of the organizations here on the call as yet have had asked in terms of AGMs that are being released, or you know, general stakeholders asking some questions. Looking at the information with a little bit more eye-opening around there and asking some questions of, well, you've reported some of these maybe non-financial information. What does this mean? What does this mean in terms of impact? I think we've seen governments, as you see, come along the way as well. We mentioned a couple up front in the beginning of this presentation as to what Ghana is really doing within your country. And I think those national priorities are being escalated. And then you've seen regulators as well starting to ask these questions. And more importantly, I think we're starting to see investors, because they are stressed. They want to know, they feel there's not transparent information around these things. Standard setters are getting together, and I think we can explore that one a little bit later. The supply chain, somewhere along the line, businesses form part of a supply chain. So when you have to report into somebody else, they're going to be asking to you, so what is your ambitions towards net zero? Because it's affecting mine. Consumers, you and I, just as individuals, are increasingly looking at the products we purchase. Is it sustainable? Do we really want to be buying from this company, or should we be going to a company that's got more recyclable materials in their packaging? So I think those are kind of the things that are actually driving the need to consider ESG matters and embed them into what businesses need to do. Thank you, Now.
Thank you, Joy T. On the matter of access to funds. Yes, I want to throw that question to Kobina because he's coming from the World Bank and the IFC background, and we know that they provide IFC provides funds for private sector, and then the World Bank provides support for government. So, from where you sit as an insider in the World Bank, we want a really brief overview because now we all need to keep our eyes on the clock. We want to afford participants an opportunity to ask questions. So we want to look at a brief overview of, or a brief summary of what it's like from that side of the table. Do you usually have businesses getting discouraged or governments getting discouraged when you try to assign all of what seem to be strict rules in before you allocate funds or you disperse funds? Do you find them pushing back? Do you find them people turning away and not coming back because they don't want to be ESG or sustainability compliant? What's the general experience from your end? And then perhaps if there are any funds out there that are looking for people, there are any funds that are available to sustainable businesses, perhaps you can throw something our way in the direction of the participants so that they would know how to take advantage of these things. Thank you, Kobina.
Yeah, now you did very well explaining exactly how members of the World Bank Group actually work. So for those in private sector, you'll be dealing with the IFC. For government, you'll be dealing with the IBRD and IDA, who usually will be referred to as the World Bank, but plus two other members, they form the World Bank Group. And so what I would say is that in most cases, what the group seeks to do is to encourage and build capacity. So while they may have standards which come with some strict requirements and all of that, in most cases, when they provide funding, they are also providing what we call technical assistance. And so depending on the outcomes of whatever due diligence exercise that is conducted as part of the preparatory processes, there would be some allocation of the fund that goes into capacity building. So the encouragement is that there's always a recognition of the fact that not every company, not every government will be at the same level at all times. And so there's always a lot of commitment to building capacities of those who seek for funding. So for private companies, you are most likely to have some of these requirements captured as provisions in whatever contract or agreement that are agreed with you. And in the process, they have a discussion with you, they agree on reasonable timelines for each of the activities that is put in the action plan. And so it may look like the standards are a bit stringent, but in terms of implementation, I can assure companies on this call that there's always that support that we are happy to provide. And so you would not be denied funding just because you do not have, you are not there yet, you do not have the systems properly set up. No. What probably would prevent you from getting funding is where you are unable to demonstrate commitment to ensuring that the right things are done. So when the due diligence is done and you agree to a plan to support you in putting up the systems that enable you to identify risks, to screen the risks, to categorize the risks, to put them in the right places so that what amount of resources you are dedicating to each risk category or level. And in the process, we are also saying that we are not just interested in you managing risks, and that even in the management of risks, there are opportunities that come with it. So we would help you to identify such opportunities and then be able to develop specific products or services to address them. So, I mean, I was at Cal Bank before World Bank, and I can assure you that because Cal Bank, permit me to use that example because it's the only commercial bank I've worked with, over the years, they had committed to that process. So when Cal Bank started some 32 years ago, IFC was a shareholder. So that kind of training and appetite, came because it was the IFC requiring them to do this. But I think because of the hand-holding processes, they linked, over time to, implement some of these things. And so now they become attractive to, now they have funding from North Fund, from Think Fund, from Pupaco, from AFD, from Arise. And so these are opportunities that a company opens itself up to when they decide to go through the process, when they decide to commit to learning and establishing systems, which most of these people are happy to support through their technical assistance programs.
Thank you, Kobna. We had so much fun and got carried away, and now we have to make sure that we beat the clock and not the other way around. So, Dennis, can you quickly run us through and briefly run us through the regulatory aspect of things, and perhaps you may conclude with whether or not you think Ghana needs a national framework and whether Ghana is right for a national framework, a national sustainability or ESG framework, given how certain sectors and industries are already taking the lead and releasing their own sets of requirements when it comes to ESG and sustainability. We want to do this very, very concisely so that
So I'll do my best to be very concise and precise. So two regulators in Ghana have taken the lead on ESG issues. That's the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Bank of Ghana. So first, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which has the mandate to regulate the securities market for its development and to protect the interests of investors and also the integrity of the market. It first came out in November 2016 with the mandatory disclosure items for public companies in Ghana. And among the mandatory items that public companies were supposed to disclose in their annual reports was the policy and performance with environmental and social responsibility, a code of ethics for all employees, and whether they have a code of ethics for the board, and whether they are waivers to this code. Then subsequent to this, and just recently, November 2022, SEC has now published the ESG Disclosures Guidance Manual, which is supposed to guide listed companies in Ghana and other companies that are interested in ESG reporting on how to collect, analyze, and publicly disclose ESG information. That meets international standards in ESG reporting. And also the guidance is supposed to help them to progressively incorporate or integrate ESG in their strategy, operations, and performance management. The standards or disclosure framework heavily dwells on the GRI standards, which has been recommended for ESG reporting for listed companies in Ghana. And companies are required to adhere to their EGRI standards. So the guidance manual, it proposes a common set of ESG metrics for reporting by all companies. But however, companies are encouraged to do a material assessment exercise so that if they would have to add additional topics for disclosure, they do that for their peculiar circumstances. So it means that for all ESG disclosures that companies will do, there are mandatory disclosures, which include social human rights, labor and working conditions, occupational health and safety, training and education, diversity and equal opportunity. For environmental, that's the environmental oversight, environmental compliance and footprint. And they have the option to include consumer protection and pay ratios, that's for CEO and gender, as well as for environmental, water and effluent management, waste management, energy consumption, and climate risk mitigation. So in addition to these measures that have been specified, the guidance manual also provides additional guidance for 10 sectors which include agri, mining and energy, sales and distribution, insurance, education, food and beverage, banking, and telecoms. The second regulator that has taken the lead and has come out with ESG guidelines is the Bank of Ghana. And in 2019, the Bank of Ghana published the Ghana Sustainable Banking Principle and Sector Guidance Notes. It is the main purpose of this document is for banks, universal banks in Ghana, to take account of environmental consideration, social inclusion, and good governance in their lending decision-making. And it's also supposed to guide banks to mainstream the fundamental tenets of sustainability in their business and operations for enhanced growth and increased returns. So what inspired this? So Ghana, like many developing countries, a significant proportion of projects is financed by universal banks. And the consequence is that there's this risk that banks can use their funding for activities which would impact adversely on the environment and environmental quality and social standards. And recent developments from the 2016 United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda, the Paris Declaration, and the rising civil actions, as well as pressure from development finance institutions, necessitated the need for the BOG to come out with these guidance. So the guidance document is based on 7 principles. The first is banks are supposed to do environmental and social risk management in their lending decisions so that they first check the risks to their operations and as well as look at the risks of the impact they're having on the environment. Secondly, banks are also supposed to look at their internal social and governance in their own banking operations. Banks are also supposed to look at corporate governance and ethical standards, where banks are supposed to refrain from doing business with entities that engage in unethical behavior or practices. Banks are supposed to promote gender equality in their lending and operations. Banks are also supposed to promote financial inclusion, that is extending their services to unbanked, banked and unbanked areas of the country, promotes resource efficiency and sustainable consumption and production. And finally, with all these principles being adhered to, banks are required to do reporting so that it will drive performance, then they can compare whether they are doing well or they are not doing well. Yeah. So to quickly move to your question on whether Ghana needs a national framework for ESG. This is a difficult question. It's easy to say Ghana needs a government policy on ESG than say we need a national framework. Indeed, when we have a national framework, it becomes useful for our local circumstances to address all our peculiarities in our environment and stuff. But you also have to have in mind that Ghana is operating in a community of other countries where we have so many frameworks, which is colloquially referred to as a alphabet soup, because we have the GRI, we have the CDP and all other stuff. So I feel an easy policy action would be for government to recommend a set of international standards, just like the Securities and Exchange Commission has recommended the GRI standard for reporting, and also mandate sector regulators to do a comprehensive assessment and do add-ons to metrics that are supposed to be reported on. I believe in terms of whether we should make reporting mandatory or not, it will be useful if we have a benchmarking system or a threshold where large companies is made necessarily that they report, and it's highly recommended for SMEs and different banks, because we also need to have in mind the cost of assembling and analyzing ESG data. I would pause here so that if there are other things I should add on, I'll add on to it. Since
this is a very interesting topic, and yeah. I wish we had the time. I wish we had the time to go deeper into it. I guess we can afford a couple of minutes for Joy to share her thoughts on the subject with us. Kwabena, not Kwabena, the assurance partner, has also indicated that he has a few words. He has a few words he wants to share with us before moving to the the question and answer session. And yes, and then Kobna, to given from where he sits at the World Bank, he can also perhaps spare 2 minutes. We are watching the clock, 2 minutes, on the topic of whether there's the need for a national framework or not. So Joyce, your 2 cents, and then move on to Kobna.
Sure, no problem. Thank you. So, I mean, I don't work. I come from an outside perspective, outside of your beautiful country of Ghana, and I bring probably an international kind of view. I think many of you might have been aware that as mentioned earlier, the International Sustainability Standards Board are producing, and they're already in draft, sustainability standards to try and align this alphabet soup that is out there that really preparers are struggling to understand which one to actually deal with and comply with. So I think that is a matter for consideration within the environment, within which one works. But as it was mentioned earlier in one of the introductory videos, don't wait, right? If there are some information in place, start gathering it, start making processes. And we've seen and we've worked with companies in this way where we have gone back and said, well, let's see where you are. Let's see what is your status quo. Should we be maybe doing something like a gap assessment, or to understand where are your gaps in the information that you need? Should you be really looking and helping you revisit your strategy in that space as well? Doing these materiality assessments, working with companies, we have seen that these things have heightened the ESG agenda within the companies and able them to tell the story. Yes, there's a framework to report on, but the ultimate thing is what one wants to do is talk about the value creation, preservation, and erosion and incorporate the ESG aspects within that. So looking at gap assessments, materiality assessments, and then, combining to see what is actually out there will help you drive probably what the process will be to get you to high quality reporting and high quality story that actually makes an impact out there. So consider what is out there. Think about, I forgot to mention, there's EU standards as well. So if you're a subsidiary out there, let us know, and we can help you understand those in a separate conversation to this as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Joyce, for bringing up EU. And I guess would have to have a subsequent round 2 of this conversation so that we can dedicate more time to the individual aspects of what we have discussed in totality today. And Kobna from World Bank, your 2 cents, and then we'll bring in Kobna from Deloitte to share a few words with us.
No, so I agree with what everyone has said. So for me, in all of these discussions, there are a lot of elements, there are a lot of things we can talk about, but for a company that is listening to us, not everything is meant for everybody. So it's all about the materiality, it's all about proportionality. And so those are the 2 things I just want to stress: materiality, proportionality. You look at what is useful for you and you do that. In the meantime, for most of the companies, you have reporting requirements to the EPA, which looks at your water consumption, energy consumption, waste management. It looks at a number of things. For those of you who are into abstraction of water for the sachet water production or for some other process, you have reporting requirement, obligations towards the Water Resource Commission. You are looking at quality, you need to report to Standards Authority. For those of you in the hospitality, you have a number of them, FDA, EPA. FDA is the Food and Drugs Authority. There are a lot of requirements. If we can, as Jority said, if we can start putting all of these data together and getting used to what we even are doing locally, it will be easier for us to do what is required of us internationally. Thank you.
Thank you, Kobna. Okay, I don't know if Kobna.
Great. Hello.
Hello, Kobna.
Yes. So you can.
Let's hear from you.
Okay, so I think a lot of information has been shared, and is huge. And at the beginning, I said ESG has come to stay, and all that partner has said, great insight. Thank you so much. I think I'll have to pay you a visit for ESG announce myself. I great insight. Dennis, great insight. Joyty, just awesome. So, but I think one thing I also want, one point I want to make is this: the ESG is now going a long way to even affect how companies are rated. All right, and so that is very important. So, if you want a good rating, then you must be ESG friendly, and I mean that is where we are going. So the rating is being affected by your ESG level of compliance, and then even countries' rating are even being affected by how compliant they are or whether they have an ESG framework. You know, so these are very important things, and I think these points are worth repeating. And I think Dennis also mentioned the manual that has been issued. I think it's not by SEC, but it's by the Ghana Stock Exchange. Okay, so if you want a copy of it, it's on the Ghana Stock Exchange website. Okay, so just go there, you'll get a copy. So in all these things, now what I want to also end with is that the journey must start now. The ESG journey must start now. And you can start this journey with Deloitte. It's very important that you go to the right doctor. Deloitte is the right doctor. So the ESG journey must start with Deloitte. Start with us through the journey. We will help you with what Kopna was saying, the materiality and things like that, all the way through management and disclosures. So we can provide you excellent service in all this. So now that is what I just wanted to add, and that we have also come up with an article on the manual that was just issued. So we will share that article with you. It's a very good read, good insight. So get hold of that article, we'll share it, and then you can read further. So thank you, and now over to you. Thanks.
I'll be sending an invoice to you for marketing on our session. So expect the invoice. But thank you. You said very key and important things, particularly on the issue of early adoption and compliance, because whether or not we are ready and whether or not we want to, it's just a matter of time, especially when it comes to companies that report using the IFRS system. And then when it comes to the Bank of Ghana and sustainable banking principles, for instance, you are likely to be affected if you want to access a facility from any of the commercial banks in Ghana. You're likely to be affected by the Ghana Stock Exchange and disclosure requirements if you fall within the scope of what they call the reporting boundary, so that whether or not you are up along its chain of business or downstream or upstream, you could ask a customer or a user of their product or services, or whether you're a supplier, you feed into their business, you are likely to be impacted by it, because all of these companies that are regulated by the Stock Exchange or the Bank of Ghana are required to make certain disclosures. And they are supposed to, sort of like we said, sustainability is an ideal. So they are supposed to set metrics and targets and aspire towards meeting them, so that if for instance, you have a very huge carbon footprint, or you have extremely poor labor laws or extremely poor human rights record, then the businesses that you deal with that are regulated or by state institutions will likely have to cut ties with you. So whether or not you want to, you will have to comply in one way or the other, and it's just a matter of time. So yes, this leads us into the Q&A phase. Let's I'm not sure if anybody has raised their hands up. Okay.
Yeah, their hands up. Yeah.
Okay.
And there are questions as well in the chat box.
I accidentally muted. So we will answer the questions in the chat box. The team has answered some of them already, but we want to look at those who have raised their hands, whether it's in the form of comments or questions. And please try and keep your questions brief and your comments brief so that you can afford other participants a chance to also speak. So Dorcas is going to take the questions. She's going to read out the questions, and then we'll see which of the panelists is best suited to address them.
Okay, thank you very much, Na. We have one question from Richmond. In the end, this conversation is narrowed down to a cost versus benefits. How can the conversation around ESG and its related index management parameters be tailored to consider the operational, management, and financial context of small business in Ghana? I don't know if I should take two questions at a time or one at a time.
I think one at a time. So, Katie, can you please take this one? I don't know if you'd want to talk us to repeat it, or you've got a hang of what Richmond was
I didn't hear it. Was sorry, the first part was very faint, so I'm not sure if anybody else heard it that wants to quickly respond. I could not hear the first part of the question. I just heard impact on Ghanaian small business.
The reason why I threw the question to you is because it's an implementation question, and because you're coming from a business space. So even though the question for Ghana, how we draw on your experience, how small are able
businesses
to
could do this. Yeah, and I think it really comes down to just applying some very key principles around it. Understand what your purpose is. Start with looking at what is your purpose as a business. 2, everybody has a strategy, vision, and mission. It doesn't have to be broad. You don't have to have a standalone ESG one. Start thinking about how does the E, the S, and G filter embed into your current strategy. I think very simplistically, have you look at your stakeholder issues, right? All of you, whether you're big or small, you all have stakeholders out there. What are those issues that they have brought into you, and how does that respond to the risks of your business? Start along that journey, and through that you will identify what is key, what is measure yourself on how you're responding. So I think all businesses, if they follow something, principles on those approach, irrespective if you're big or small, will enable you to tell the story quite nicely. So think about it in those manners. So hopefully that's a concise answer.
It is. Thank you, Joyce. We would like to call Fred Boama to ask his question. Fred, can you hear us? I think your mic has been unmuted, so you can go ahead and ask your question. Okay, can we move on to Daniel? I hope there's only one Daniel on the call, because I don't have a surname.
Hello, this is Daniel. Okay, hello everyone. This is Daniel Lante from EPA. I work with EPA, the Climate Change Unit, and then I'm happy to be here. I like the fact that we've all connected the environmental regulations that exist in Ghana, and then as well as the climate change opportunities and vision for government, and also linking it to the financial plan that government has developed to just galvanize support for our local businesses to be able to implement some form of climate action. And I like the fact that now also put it out there that if there are any form of ideas or financial instruments that we could link our businesses to, we should put it out there. And I would like to take the opportunity to mention that because the steer market that was under the KPO, that's a Kyoto Protocol, has moved away, and there's a new form of market, that carbon market, that we refer to under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. But Ghana has developed the first framework and has issued a letter of authorization under SAME. That's the first ever in the world. And we want to take the opportunity to inform the businesses that are here have emission reduction outcomes. You could reach out to us. We are willing to help you convert those ideas into concept notes that can enable you secure money to be able to move beyond the barrier of finance and the barrier of technology, so that you are able to implement some of these climate actions in support of the overall objective of the goal of the Paris Agreement. So that's just to provide a summary of some of the key takeaways from this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And EPA should expect my invoice as well. So I'm making a list of the people I'll be sending invoices to. But thank you very much for your contribution. And we would like to explore the conversation around the Paris Agreement, climate change, and carbon credits much further. So yes, we'll reach out to you and then set up something and get something going. So thank you for making the time to join us as well. Next person, we'll call on Infon Etienne. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Mr. Etienne, are you ready to ask your question? If Mr. Etienne is not, we can move on to Mohammed. Mohammed.
Okay. Yes, thank you now for the opportunity. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay. I think I'll direct my question to Dennis. In the financial space, in the banking industry, we have banks given
before you go on, Mohammed, please direct your question to me and I will assign it to the panelist best suited to answer.
Okay, very well.
Thank you.
So yes, thank you very much. Banks do issue debit cards and then payment instruments to their customers, as in checkbooks. So as per policy, these checkbooks have some duration that the bank will have to keep them upon. If this period elapses, the banks are supposed to destroy these instruments. So from the environmental sustainability point of view, if a bank decides to do this distraction by burning these instruments, what is the opinion of your experts here on the issue of burning these instruments?
Thank you, Mohammed. Kobna is the environmental specialist on this panel. So I'll pose the question to him first. If Joy T and Dennis have any comments, they can bring it later. But Kobna, this falls right into your laps.
Sorry, I just muted myself. I just unmuted myself. So first of all, you know, as long as we keep producing these books, they would have to be disposed of, right? So what I think most banks are doing now is to try and reduce the use of checkbooks. And so you would realize that most banks have invested a lot more into electronic channels, and they always encourage customers to use, you know, such platforms. And in fact, in some cases, I mean, the provisions are so, so good that you would want to use an electronic channel than use the traditional way of, using a checkbook. So, I mean, once you use the checkbooks, they would be disposed of the usual way. And in most cases, I mean, what they call the mitigation hierarchy, you would always want to avoid or reduce, eliminate it, and then it becomes easier. But once you find them in the system, I mean, people will deal with them the way they've always done, which is usually not environmentally friendly.
Thank you, Kobna. You've addressed it well and extensively. I don't know if Joy T and Dennis, do you have anything to add? Okay. It's 5 minutes to 12. Our panelists will have to drop off at 12. So unfortunately, we have to come to an end with respect to the question and answers. But the good news is we are here to answer your questions even beyond this. We provided some contact information on our flyers. That's 1 and 2. We have collected the questions in the chat boxes. So if you've raised your hand and we didn't get round to calling you, you can send the questions to us. We'll compile everything and put it in the Q&A, as I said at the beginning of the session, and then we'll send them to you. I want to say a huge thank you to all of you for joining us. It's been 2 hours and you've stayed on, you've been dedicated, and you've showed great interest in what we are doing and in the conversation. Currently on the screen, we have the QR code for an assessment of the session. And please take time to complete the survey, because that's how we can improve on what we have done today. And knowing how extensive the topic of ESG and sustainability is, this is not an end to it. This is just the beginning of a series of conversations and interactions we intend to have with the public. So stay tuned, look out, always be on the lookout for what Deloitte is doing in that space. And we promise you that you will be entertained, you will be enlightened, and we'll share our extensive knowledge and experience with you in that space. So thank you all for joining. I don't know if Kobina, Dennis, or Joyty have any passing words before the clock strikes 12.
Very quickly, if I could say, please consider this to be, if all of you run businesses, business resilience is important. This is not a standalone matter. To be sustainable in the future, please do consider these matters, and we look forward to engaging with you and walking this amazing journey. I've come to learn a lot just from this webinar, and we hope to see you guys in the future again. So thank you for the opportunity to share my insights.
Thank you, Joyty. Dennis?
Yes, so I would encourage businesses to take ESG serious, because in addition to building resilience in your product, in your strategy and operations, it helps you innovate, and the circularity that happens also improves some efficiency in your action. So it's win-win for you. So take it serious, and Deloitte is here to help you. Thanks.
Thank you, Dennis. Kobina?
All right, so thank you once again for the opportunity. I just want to say that right here in this country, I know banks, institutions, which are benefiting so much from financial support or funding support because of their commitment to ESG. So let's all get on board, and then let's get the required funding that we all need to expand and become the international and corporate institutions that we all aspire to be. Thank you.
Thank you, and we're right on time, and let's all go and have a very productive and wonderful day. Thank you all. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You.
Site with finance functions, it would be, don't wait. We need to get started on ESG reporting today. I'm Noura Taya, partner and ESG reporting leader at Deloitte Canada, and a deputy global ANA Sustainability and Climate Services leader. There are a lot of different ESG disclosure requirements being proposed today. And while we await the finalization of these proposed requirements, for the most part, ESG reporting continues to be voluntary. Because of that, one of the questions that we get a lot is whether it's better to just wait until regulators have aligned and ESG disclosure requirements are finalized, rather than risk having to build it twice. There are 3 good reasons why you shouldn't wait. The first is that while we don't know precisely where things are going to land, there are a lot of areas where we have a pretty good sense of where the requirements are going to end up. Second, even if there is a risk that you have to change some of the parts along the way, if you don't start now, you might not have enough time. Experience from other major reporting implementations like SOX, IFRS, and so on has taught us it can take years to get all the pieces right, especially when you think about things like data, systems, controls, and governance. The third and most important is that this is a chance to tell your story to a growing group of stakeholders before that story is formed for you. It needs to be the right story, told transparently and accurately. So while there are pending regulatory requirements, these requirements should be viewed as a catalyst and should not be the main driver.